one of the most hard-bitten atheists that Lewis knew, said that there might be good evidence for the Gospels. And it looked as if God really had entered human history one time, and that the myths that they enjoyed so much might have happened at some point in time. The interesting thing is Tolkien also echoes this sentiment and says, you love these myths about the dying and rising God, who when by dying, they save their people and redeem them in some way, are oddly touched by these myths, except when it happens in the gospel. Maybe that was the true myth. That kind of plants the final seed in Lewis's conversion narrative in a really anticlimactic conversion where he was in his brother's sidecar on the way to Whipsnade Zoo, and he talks about how when they set out, he did not believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God, and when he got to the zoo, when they got to the zoo, he did. And he didn't. It was like waking up. He didn't spend any time in great thought, and he was he describes himself as the most reluctant convert in all of England.
All right, welcome back to the Evangelical Anglican. This is episode 30, and I have the great honor to have on Sophia Holcomb this week. Sophia is a 17-year-old junior in high school who is also a burgeoning C.S. Lewis expert and blogs a lot about C.S. Lewis and is just really brilliant and has a really interesting take on Lewis. And so I think Lewis, if I have a podcast called the Evangelical Anglican, and if the whole point of this is to present a form of Anglicanism that has a wide-reaching across the kind of Christian sphere and a simple, singular focus on the essence of Christianity. And in particular is a very rational, non-mystical and mysterious, but a rational, word-based approach to religion. That religion is fundamentally a religion of propositions that have to be spoken and believed and even argued for and even aesthetically put and, like made beautiful and made convincing and be persuasive, which we believe Christianity is. Could there be anyone better than to talk about C.S. Lewis? And so I think Lewis is a perfect example of what it means to be an evangelical Anglican, what it means to speak to the broader church, and really what it means. And one of the things that really comes out in our conversation is Lewis's focus, yes, on big picture things, but also the ways in which he focused people on the ordinary things in their life. Particularly, it's powerful that in the midst of World War II, in the midst of Germany bombing Britain, in the midst of seeming like everything around people was falling apart, you have this guy giving these radio addresses talking about sometimes big things, but also sometimes very small things. I have my copy of Mere Christianity here, talking about things like charity and morality, the cardinal virtues, sexual morality, Christian marriage, forgiveness, pride, faith. I mean, talking about things that you might think in the wake of a giant catastrophic event, who on earth has time to talk about marriage? And yet it is the thing that Lewis began to focus on because it's actually the thing that you actually have control over. And it's actually the ordinary things in your life that really matter. And I don't think that's far off from the Apostle Paul, who in the midst of speaking about very huge cosmic realities in Christ and what Jesus has done, also would take time to talk about working hard, and how husbands and wives should relate and how children should relate to their parents. And almost as if the ordinary things in your life are actually the concrete realities in front of you that really matter. Um, and these abstract things, although they do matter and we do, as human beings, question them, um, we should not let them get all the billing. Because at the end of the day, the thing that you actually have to live in, the thing that you actually have to look in the mirror at every day is yourself and your life and your marriage and your family and the homeless man on the street. Or should you give him money or should you not? These are the questions that actually motivate Christians um, beyond the abstract. So I think that comes out in the conversation with Sophia. Again, Sophia's brilliant. It's a lot of fun talking with her. I mean, 17 years old. And just a lot of fun. So grateful for her to be on and cannot wait for you to hear our conversation. All right, well, today I am joined by Sophia Holcomb. Sophia is a junior in high school, but also a burgeoning C.S. Lewis scholar. And we were going to talk about Lewis and his legacy and impact on both Anglicanism and Evangelicalism. And Sophia, glad to have you on the show.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you are now, I mean, I just think this is fascinating. So you're 17 years old.
Yes.
And you are already, this is not your first podcast.
It's not. I've had the privilege of working with White Horse Inn a few months ago to talk about Narnia and then Lewis's theology at large. And then a while ago I did one in 9th grade, but we don't really talk
I
about
think your
that.
dad
Yeah.
sent me that one.
Yeah.
It was great.
Thank you.
You're writing a lot about Lewis. You're becoming a bit of an online C.S. Lewis scholar. What first got you into or interested in C.S. Lewis?
Yeah, so growing up in a Christian home, I had the Chronicles of Narnia everywhere, but the catch was I hated it for the longest time.
Hey, so
I
do
just
my
could
kids.
not. Okay, yeah, they'll get there eventually. Uh, um, but I just could not get into the story. I only found the image of Aslan compelling. That was the only thing I enjoyed about the story. And then I realized at some point, like I read a lot of books because I think I should. I'm kind of coming out of that, but that was when I was younger, a mindset I had as a reader. It was like there's certain books you just have to read. So I signed up for a Lewis class my first year of high school. And I was like, okay, I just got to read Mere Christianity. I just got to tough it out. My dad's a priest. I grown up in the church. This is the thing you do, especially growing up Episcopalian, Anglican. I knew Lewis was like the Anglican.
Right.
And so I started reading Mere Christianity. And I was really impressed, and I found it refreshing how simple but not simplistic his language was. And I saw why he appealed to so many people, and it was just beautifully written. And I got like so many people to the liar, lunatic Lord passage, and I was already a Christian, but just it felt like more confirmation, and just a different way of thinking about things that I hadn't encountered elsewhere. And so since then, I've just loved learning from him. He's introduced me to a lot of other subjects and a lot of other people to study. Like I probably never really would have read Tolkien or George MacDonald or any of the Inklings. A little known fact, he was really invested in the classics. And as I learned that about him, I was starting to become interested in Greek and Latin. And it was almost like permission, like, no, this is an okay path of study. So he kind of does that with people. You're introduced to Lewis, and then there's so many other things that come with that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So you were what grade when you read Mere Christianity?
9th grade.
Okay, I think I read Mere Christianity in 9th grade. I remember I had a little Bible study with some guys up in a closet, and we would read Mere Christianity. I think I was the only one who actually read it. And even then, we probably only got through the first part. I went and finished it, but it was kind of the go-to. It was the go-to book for anyone who's like Christian but wants to go deeper. You know, if you're like a teenager and you're like, hey, I want to go deeper, they're like, read Mere Christianity. That's the first place to start. And really, I do think I recently went back and reread some of it. It is a lot. His language, his ability to write is just so intelligent, but like you're saying, simple and concise. Now, part of that is Mere Christianity was a radio broadcast, right?
Right. Yeah. And during World War II. And I forget that sometimes, but it's important to remember that because he was originally brought on to basically comfort a nation in the throes of this unpredictable climate. And so a lot of that comes through is that he's not condemning, but he is saying, you're sinners, and this is an uncomfortable situation you're in. What are you going to do? Who are you going to
Yeah.
turn to? So he
Right.
does it, and he says something like that, which comes across as really harsh, but in such a gentle way.
Yeah.
And also in a simple way so that it's not like just scholars understand or just like politicians, but like people just sitting in their living rooms with their families listening to this form of entertainment, essentially.
Yeah. Mm. And he's talking about like potentially having to forgive the Nazis
Yeah.
in the
And at this
middle of
point,
World War
yeah.
II.
Mm-hmm.
It's a wild statement to make. It's a
Mm-hmm.
true statement to make, but um, it's a wild one. So give us a little bit of C.S. Lewis's backstory. Pretend
Mm-hmm.
I'm an idiot, which is not hard, but tell us a little bit about him, uh,
Yeah.
how he came to get to where he was.
Of course, yeah. So, C.S. Lewis, Clive Staples Lewis, he went by Jack with his close friends and family. He was born in Belfast, Ireland at the turn of the century, so like 1898, and he fought in World War One. So that makes sense. Like when he's talking about during World War II, he has context for the travesty of war, and he was wounded in World War One. Today, he's probably known as one of the greatest lay theologians of the 20th century. And I always emphasize the word lay, is he was not a professional theologian.
Mm.
And by trade, he was an English literature tutor. So while a lot of what he said about theology was very erudite, there is some of it to be taken with a grain of salt. Like he was not a professional theologian. And he
Right.
is very good. And that's not to discount it, but with nuance, of course. A lot of his um, English, like professional work as an English tutor, is still used in universities as the definitive work, which I think is a testament to his fantastic ability to, like an elevator, he's able to rise up to the level of incredible scholarly work and then also come down to like the everyman's vocabulary.
Yeah.
Today he's well known, like I said, for Mere Christianity and the Chronicles of Narnia. Throughout his life, he wrote over 30 books in various genres: poetry, essays, nonfiction, fiction, sci-fi, mythology. Professionally, he was a tutor at Magdalen College, Oxford, from, if I'm not mistaken, 1929 to about 1954, when then he was given a professorship at Cambridge. Where a chair was created for him as the medieval and Renaissance literature professor, and it was his first professorship.
Well,
Um, he was part of the Inklings, which was a literary group, unofficial club essentially that met in Oxford. One of which a member was Tolkien, who is probably substantially more famous than Lewis in the modern imagination because of Lord of the Rings, but they were very close friends. And he wasn't really famous in America until Screwtape Letters came out, and he was on the cover of Time magazine with a devil on his shoulder in the subtitle. I love this. It was His Heresy, Christianity.
well,
Um, so he was on the cover of Time magazine, which was like his big break, if we want to call it that, in America. And just an interesting fact that tells people about the type of person Lewis was that he would get fan mail from Americans, people in the UK, and he would respond to every single letter. And we still have a lot of those. And it's a different view of Lewis that are still really valuable to read. Of course, with discernment, is that these are people's private documents, so we don't just throw them about everywhere, but they're still
right.
very, very helpful. And then at the end of his life, An American wrote him a letter. Her name was Joy Davidman, and she was a writer. She was married with 2 children, and it's a complicated story. So if anyone's actually interested in looking into this, I encourage it. But she would eventually move to the UK. She would get divorced from her abusive alcoholic husband, and she married Lewis while she was dying of cancer. Like I said, it's super complicated, and I don't want to co-opt this time to talk about that whole story, but he did marry Joy Davidman, and they were married for 3 years. And I bring this whole story up because they collaborated on probably one of his most cohesive novels, which was Till We Have Faces.
Okay.
And it's not well known by any stretch of the imagination, but it brings together ideas that are in pretty much every single one of his previous books. And that was the last novel he wrote.
Mm.
And so she died in 1960. He died 3 years after, on November 22nd, 1963, which was the same day as JFK and Aldous Huxley.
Yeah.
So he had a relatively short life. He died a week shy of his 65th birthday, but he accomplished an incredible amount that is still his legacy is still obviously very helpful to so many people. And I failed to mention this in the beginning, but he was an atheist for a lot of his adolescence, and then also pretty much up until his 30s, so about half his life. And he grew up, like I said, in Belfast, and his grandfather was a rector in the Church of Ireland. But he really officially became an atheist at the age of 14, I think. That's not confirmed, but that's when he was at private school. But I digress to go back. His mother died of cancer when he was 9 years old.
Okay.
And I think that was, what 9-year-old is really profoundly connected to their faith? I don't. So Lewis, I think at that point, didn't really have much stock in religion. He was like, my mother's dead. He's sent off to boarding school 3 weeks after her death, essentially.
Right.
And there's no real faith portrayed in these schools. So it was easy for him to slip away. And when he writes about it, there was no real definitive, like, I'm an atheist now. It was, what kind of God makes these things happen if he were real, which I think is a thought a lot of people have, which makes Lewis a relatable figure. Because he viewed the world as cruel, meaningless. But all the while, even through his childhood, he was having these experiences of joy that he couldn't pinpoint. He didn't know where it was coming from, but it was hard for him to reconcile these supernatural longings with his materialistic worldview that he was developing. And so that goes on as he's at Oxford and as he's participating in his education. And all the while he has this interest in the occult or the supernatural. So he thinks the occult must be like the right avenue for that. So he participates in that, dabbles, but then he starts noticing his friends having bad psychological reactions, and as you might expect. And so he adopted the strict materialist mindset, which he called the New Look. And he had this through his time in World War I. He had it pretty much up till 1926 when
I did not know that he was into the occult.
Yeah.
So Mr. kind of man of reason, science, atheist. So at first he's kind of interested in spirituality in general. And then after he sees that is having a bad effect on some of the people dabbling in it, he says, well, none of it's real.
Yeah. Or,
just like straight.
Yeah.
It's just so fascinating to go from atheistic, spiritualist, pagan, interested in some devil stuff.
Yeah.
It starts to actually work, and then you go, no, none of it's real. It's like,
yeah.
Why would you not think, well, it's real. Like, I need to back out of this. I guess you do feel like you have to back out of it, but to retreat to a naturalistic explanation for everything is fascinating.
Yeah, it truly is. And I think Lewis was smart enough to know that it was taking him, because at this time he's also reading books that by Christians, and he's realizing that these these books by Christians are infinitely better than these thin and tinny voices he's hearing from like non-Christian authors. They're just more robust in his opinion, and he's terrified by that because he's trying to do everything he can to separate himself from spirituality after his stuff with the occult. So I think it was just easier to adopt his new look and just head down, focus on his studies. And this is after World War I, so there's a lot psychologically happening there, I'm sure.
Because
Mhm.
I know that, isn't it true that him and Tolkien, I mean, experienced some pretty horrible things in World War I? Did that have any play on his like dabbling in the occult or his interest in spirituality?
I mean, you mentioned horrible, so much to the point that they didn't talk about it to any
Right.
extent. So it's
Right.
hard to really pinpoint chronologically. But I mean, I would expect, I don't have a definitive answer on that, but I could see a connection being
Yeah.
there with, I think there's something to what you're saying there. Yeah.
Well, I interrupted you. Keep.
No, of course. Yeah. Yeah. So he's at this time also reading George MacDonald, and he says that these books baptized his imagination. And it began because imagination was something he couldn't explain with a natural explanation. And he was having these experiences of joy, and he's like, where are these longings coming from? Like, they're not, I can't explain them empirically. And so around this time, 1926, he becomes friends with Tolkien, who, incredibly reasonable guy, except for this quirk of being a Christian and being an educated, reasonable Christian, which just annoys Lewis to no end. And then also around this time, one of the most hard-bitten atheists that Lewis knew said that there might be good evidence for the Gospels. And it looked as if God really had entered human history one time, and that the myths that they enjoyed so much might have happened at some point in time. And the interesting thing is, Tolkien also echoes this sentiment and says, you love these myths about the dying and rising God, who when by dying, they save their people and redeem them in some way. You're oddly touched by these myths, except when it happens in the gospel. Maybe that was the true myth. So that kind of plants the final seed in Lewis's conversion narrative. And it culminated in a really anticlimactic conversion where he was in his brother's sidecar on the way to Whipsnade Zoo. And he talks about how when they set out, he did not believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. And when they got to the zoo, he did. And he didn't, it was like waking up. He didn't spend any time in great thought. And he was he describes himself as the most reluctant convert in all of England.
Yeah, because there's an earlier moment when he gets, it's not the zoo, but he awakens to theism.
Right.
And
Yes.
and he has that moment in his dorm room, or something like that when he says like the way he writes it is so beautifully like, and there he entered he who I had so desperately tried not to meet,
Yeah.
But then later he gets converted to actual Christianity around Christ, the person and work. Yeah.
And I think to your point about when we talked about occultism earlier, you mentioned how it was interesting that he just shut it off. I think his conversion to theism, which did happen in his room, was kind of part of knocking down those barriers, was that he was able to believe in an absolute. That's what he called God. He was like, he didn't call God God. He said it's an absolute. And spoke of him in very impersonal terms, like it. And that was just a conversion to theism. So you're right to bring that up because I did kind of skip over that. But it was theism, materialism, theism, Christianity, eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, how long after that did he start, writing from a Christian perspective and trying to actually like influence things?
Yeah. So if I'm not mistaken with the dates, he converted 1930, 1931-ish. 1931, he wrote The Pilgrim's Regress, which was not exactly a parody, but based on The Pilgrim's Progress. And he wrote that in 2 weeks. It's incredibly convoluted because he just converted to Christianity. He's not he
It's
he
like raw.
yeah, it's incredibly raw, incredibly emotional, not in a bad way, but it is. And not the reasonable Lewis that we've all come to know in the cultural imagination, which doesn't do a disservice to it. I just think it's him trying to work things out, and then he published it. So it's not like if you have copies now, the top of each page is a summary of what's happening on that page
Yeah,
because of
I've
how
seen that.
convoluted it is.
Yeah.
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 So
To try to
I
help
don't know.
explain it.
Yeah. I don't know that he was trying to really influence anyone at that point. I think he was trying to order his thoughts. But I think he always, as a writer, I think he had he felt an obligation to now use this skill for a different purpose than just the scholarly work that he was on track to do. I mean, I can't confirm that, but something just
Yeah.
about the amount of work he produced and the amount of genres he worked in. I think it was a calling at the end of the day for him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's a bachelor most of his life.
Hmm.
What was it about Joy Davidman that piqued his interest? I mean, what
Hmm.
was it that got him
Yeah.
interested?
That's such a good question. She was also an atheist for much of her life, up until she was about 30, and she was also a communist for a little bit. So there's a lot there. She's a very complicated person, but she has a very similar life story to Lewis. Grew up as an atheist, incredibly erudite, incredibly well read. But I think ultimately, to answer your question, they had read the same things, and so they were able to collaborate on work in a way that he wasn't with Tolkien. They had similar sensibilities about writing that he didn't share with his friends. And I wonder, quite honestly, if they would have gotten married if she hadn't been diagnosed with cancer at the end of her life. I think there's a possibility they may have just been friends for like the rest of their life. I mean, she was going to stay in England, so I'm not sure that they were going to get married. But ultimately, I think what made him fall in love with her was the Sword of Damocles and realizing that he had a friend that he really loved and didn't want to lose. And I think it's psychologically super complicated, but I think there was an intellectual camaraderie that he hadn't had. I mean, he's in Oxford. Like, how many interactions is he having with women? And then, like, just
Yeah.
objectively. And then also with his friends. So I think there were a lot of factors, but I think one of it was a similar shared life experience of conversion. And she also understood that concept of joy. I know her name, but of that longing for the supernatural in a way that I think few people, when they read Lewis, it's confusing. Like, what is he talking about? But I think she understood that. And then also, I mean, some of his best works came out of their friendship. So I think I still have to think about that, but it's a good question, and that would be my answer. Yeah.
So with his works, I mean, you got the Chronicles of Narnia, you have Mere Christianity, Screwtape Letters. Those three would probably be his biggest kind of cultural landmark. Screwtape Letters, I mean, you can hear people, use Screwtape as a phrase, that's kind of a cultural. What impact do you think he has had on Christianity in England and the U.S.?
I think long term, he's had more of an impact in the US than he has in England. And I think that does go back to Screwtape Letters. Like you said, I think since he was not a professional theologian, his satirical examination of temptation appealed to a popular audience, and to the popular imagination at that time, and still does. I think his impact. I think he offers an incredibly balanced view of Christianity, not one that says you're so special and perfect and you're just need like a moralistic therapeutic deism. And he's also not on the fire and brimstone side where he's like, you're beyond saving, you're going to burn whole. There's two extremes, and he fits really comfortably in the middle. And I think that's why he appeals to Catholics, Anglicans, runs the whole gamut, Baptists, Presbyterians, non-denominational, everything, because he had the basic premise of you're a sinner, you need redemption. You break the laws of there's laws in the universe, you break them. You've set yourself against the creator. You can't save yourself, so who's going to save you? And then he makes it appealing.
Yeah.
He doesn't lie to do that, but he offers images through fiction, poetry, beautifully crafted prose to say this is a reality and it's a good reality. And he convinces people not just by stating the same thing over and over again, but not to compare Lewis to God. It's a similar tactic, I think, that God uses in scripture to consistently hammer this idea that that he's trustworthy, that he led the Israelites out of slavery, and they kept forgetting over and over again. He kept having to point them back in the right direction. I think Lewis does that in a very lowercase way, but is continually reminding people, and I think reminding himself, that God is good, ultimately beautiful, and worth loving and worth allowing yourself to be loved by him.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it is a lot of ways his affectation and his it's his imagination that actually brings forth. It doesn't feel like dry, abstract theology. It feels very personal.
Mm-hmm.
Even in his more kind of rational, reasonable, deductions, there's something about it that feels like this just eminently makes sense, and therefore you should believe it,
Mm-hmm.
and there's something really appealing about that, to be in a belief system that that's just the clearest way to explain the world. But I like that you're pointing out that idea of being a sinner. I think you can. I remember when I read Screw Tape Letters, I thought, at first I thought, oh, this will be a helpful way for me to defeat temptation, to little meditations on greed or anger or whatever, pride. But then by the time I was done with it, I remember thinking like, oh, I think the whole point of this is like, you can't, it's so indwelling within us, like sin is so ubiquitous in the human condition, that you really can't save yourself. Like, you really, you're
Mm-hmm.
not gonna,
Yeah.
you're not gonna pull yourself out of this, because there's so many tools that the devil can appeal to. Even your goodness, the devil can use to turn back and turn away from God. I just remember reading it, going like, yeah, I think the whole point of this is like, I am screwed, on
Mm-hmm.
my own.
Yeah.
What do you think are if you were just going to name one, that first one that comes to mind, what do you think is his most misunderstood work?
Ooh, that's
I'll tell you
a
what I think
fantastic
mine is.
question. Yeah, please go ahead. Please go first.
I think it's The Great Divorce. I think people always read The Great Divorce as a book actually about heaven and hell, and he
Mm-hmm.
says in the intro, this is not really about heaven and hell. And I think The Great Divorce. I find The Great Divorce. I use The Great Divorce a lot practically in talking about sin, and that there really can be none of hell in heaven. Like, and to get there, to be righteous, it is going to require giving up everything. You like Rebecca, bring your home idols with you. Like Christ requires all of you. And
Mhm.
I think that's I've always thought I think that's actually more what this thing's about.
Mhm.
It's the demand of Christ to take all of you and leave nothing but not bring nothing of that world with you. And it's our inability to do that because we cling so tightly to our sense of justice, our sin, our pride, our ego, and then the ghosts from heaven are all kind of like we don't even think about ourselves anymore. It's all kind of gone. I've always thought,
Yeah.
but what's funny is I just continually hear people talk about like, well, what's your view on hell? Is it eternal conscious torment? Is it annihilationism? People, I like C.S. Lewis's view. It wasn't actually his view. He does not actually
Yeah.
believe there's a bus stop that is taking people. So that's mine.
Mhm.
That's mine.
No,
What do you
that's
think is your
good.
most
Mhm.
misunderstood text
Yeah.
of Lewis's?
I think it's a grief observed for what it represents. A lot of people read that written after his wife's death, and they think, oh, Lewis stopped being a Christian. He lost his faith. And I think that's a sentiment that gets thrown around for any Christian when they experience doubt is that, oh, you don't have enough faith, or you're not believing hard enough. And I think that work, while Lewis isn't trying to make that point, trying to explain this to us, it comes across that doubt is not the antithesis of faith.
Hmm.
And um, God doesn't view it that way. We shouldn't view it that way. It's asking valid questions, but I think it's misunderstood because people don't understand that, especially um, in, I mean, I've only lived in America, but just from what I've noticed, it's a very American Christian idea is like you are doubting you don't have enough faith. And I think Lewis is saying through his experience, not even saying it, but experience shows that's not the case.
Hmm.
And then I also think it's just misunderstood because Lewis did not lose faith at the end of that book or at that time in his life.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that book really is. It's just him kind of stepping outside of his grief and looking at it
Hmm.
honestly.
Yeah.
And it's powerful. I mean, I remember reading that in college and thinking, gosh, I'm watching someone um like a really, really well equipped mentally, intellectually theologian talk about things the same way I would probably if I were in
Yep.
his shoes.
Hmm.
So tell me about uh you recently in your Substack, you write a lot about Lewis and now you're kind of branching off into the Inklings and his wife and you wrote something about the importance of some of his nonfiction
Hmm.
essays.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Um, yes. So his essays are maybe another thing that are misunderstood because they're hard to find. They're some of them are really easy to understand. Some of them are incredible. Like his book reviews, I just tried to read a volume of those, and I had no idea what he was saying for probably 200 pages.
Yeah.
So it's hard to navigate. So I think that's why they're not as widely read. But what I kind of have been thinking about is they're almost like a menu where you can, at different times in your life, he wrote in so many different topics, so many different genres, that it's like if you want to just talk about apologetics, there's like 10 different essays for that. If you want satire, there's 10 different essays for that. If you want stuff about how to write better or you want analysis of like literary analysis, there's essays for that. Or like comforting reads like Learning in Wartime or Living in an Atomic Age, just to realize like our time period is not that different we have our own challenges, but every age has been like this.
Hmm.
Um, and I think they're just kind of, if you think of his books, each one is like a main course. These are kind of appetizers, I think, for getting into how Lewis writes, what he writes about, the vocabulary he uses, the imagery he uses. It's a really good introduction to Lewis, but then it's also just, as I said, they mean different things to different people at different points.
Yeah.
So kind of on the writing I did do was, like I said, setting out that menu and being like, what essays apply to these different um, questions or different circumstances?
Yeah. When you look at the world, I mean, I genuinely I'm asking you as Sophia, as a 17-year-old, you've grown up in church, you're a bishop's daughter, no big deal. Like, when you look at the world, when you look at your world and you look at the church, um, what are some things that stand out of like, I really think Lewis would be really helpful here.
Mm, hmm
If we could kind of tap back into that a little bit.
Yeah. I think first and foremost, at least personally, for me at least, his writing on living in an atomic age has been really helpful because it was written when the atomic bomb was invented. And there was just general, I mean, of course there was unease because this was
Right.
unprecedented. And I
Right.
think I wasn't reading Lewis at this time, but during COVID, a lot of people on Facebook would post quotes from that essay. And it did become kind of a cliche, but I do think it became a cliche for a reason because Lewis was offering not it wasn't like over the top comfort because within that essay he says we very well might be destroyed by an atomic bomb, but let it come find us doing the things we've always been doing.
Yeah, I love that
We
line.
don't have to be undone by it.
Right.
So I think that applies, I mean, every day of the human life and the story of humanity. So I think he would lower the temperature
Mm.
in regards to anything socially, politically, what am I saying? Probably economically, um, culturally, just by saying, yeah, it's always been like this.
Do you feel like people
Yeah,
today feel like we're, living in a kind of apocalyptic end of the age? I mean, do you feel like your friends feel like, man, those things that we're facing, no one's ever faced before? Like it's
yeah,
all, I mean, do you feel that?
I do. And I think that that comes with the advent of like social media and AI. But I do, have you heard the term black pilled? Like what it means
A
to
little
be
bit, yeah.
black pilled? Yeah, like like the red pill, blue pill, but black pill is like,
To give
um,
up on the whole
to
thing.
give up, like everything's
Okay.
bad. There's kind of a
I don't know what that is. I
nihilistic.
don't know what
Yeah.
mogging is. I don't,
I don't know either, quite honestly, but black pill I do, which is like a little pseudo nihilistic, I think. And I think a lot of um youth, at least adolescents, feel that way. And I think um Lewis did too when he was my age and the like my peers' age. At least when I read, this applies kind of when I read any historical, not just about Lewis, especially with Lewis. Yes, I think people think this is all new, but it's not. And for the historian and for the reader, I think that becomes an obvious truth eventually.
Yeah, I mean, do you think like with the black pill thing, there's an undercurrent of like despair and kind of giving up, in people your age? I mean, the most horrendous example would be like suicide, but there's a big spectrum there of two of like um just beginning to feel like my life is not under my control, which is true and not true. Like uh why try? Why do anything? Or this sense of do all these small things really matter? You know, like why go get a driver's license? Why go to prom? I mean, all these things are stupid. Like which in some ways, again, you can. There's a reaction to like like putting those things up as like this is the whole goal of life.
Hmm
And then you get after prom and you're like, oh, I have to live the rest of my life. Like that was it.
Yeah.
Thought that was the end and it's not. But do you feel like there's like a sense of in people in your age or people that you just see um this kind of giving up?
I think so. And this has become evident in I've been reading this book called Bad Therapy, which was like how we're a therapeutic culture essentially. And there's a question I've noticed people have started asking, or you know how we say like how are you kind of as a greeting
Yeah.
now. It's the question of people switching to how are you really doing? And I
Yeah.
think that, honestly, I don't think that's always a good question because it trains our brains to look for the negative, and I think that just adds to the general despair of our
Yeah.
culture. So it's just an interesting mix of having this incredibly therapeutic culture and also a despairing culture, an increasingly online culture. I mean, where else are we supposed to go besides pseudo nihilism? You know,
Yeah, I
like,
mean,
quite
it,
honestly.
it really does feel like joy is kind of gone.
Hmm.
It's very hard for people to experience like real um all the happiness is usually kind of biting and kind of has an edge to it of like um I don't know, it's not as like there's not a lot of just pure enjoyment of the world.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
um like how you put that, it's brilliant to say like, oh, how are you really doing, because it means that everyone's always lying, um which is and the part of the problem is it's kind of true. But what that does say is the realest you is the miserable you underneath, and no one's actually happy. No one's actually uh, at peace. Everyone's whatever. And so I think in a lot of ways it does go back to where Lewis was with this kind of strange, I mean, the trope that he would be surprised by joy of like, why would I be joyful? And yet
Yeah.
I do feel this kind of sense of joy springing up.
Yeah. And I think that comes through in his writing is that, I mean, joy is not happiness necessarily or feeling incredibly happy. It's for him, it was this like scent of a flower he hadn't found or like news from a country he's yet to visit. Like it was this anticipation almost,
Hmm.
which eventually became his kind of his aesthetic apologetics was I must be created for another world. And it was that kind of joy that was like the good news. This isn't the only place I'm ever going to be. Like there's something
Yeah.
after this and it's going
Yeah.
to be unimaginably better than this world. And then already there's so many joys within this fallen world. So I think it was that realization that even in the monotony or despair of life, that was like, we're still able to have joy and not in like a pithy, like choose joy kind of thing, but in like a, no, like
Right.
we have cause to be joyful.
Right. And
Yeah.
not only even there is an element of that is like, yes, those in Christ can experience a certain joy that not those outside of Christ can't. But I think the brilliance of what Lewis is trying to talk about a lot of times is like the beauty of creation and the goodness of
Hmm.
creation, that there's
Yeah.
reason to be joyful now. And what he would want is ask yourself where does that come from? And like you're saying, it points towards something else. Um, but I was thinking earlier when we were talking about mere Christianity, and I didn't know where the conversation was going to go, but there is something beautiful that in the midst of um, World War II, let's say this. In the midst of the pandemic, what I did was I completely stopped looking at my like ordinary life. Like my parenting, like we've barely recovered as parents from you just like letting all of your kind of we things were like in order, and there's a rhythm to like the day, and well, we did this and we went here, and um we were very strict about TV, and we were, all of these things as parents that we kind of set out like this is who we're going to be. Well, and a lot of my friends are like this. Pandemic like killed that, and it was the first thing
Hmm.
to go. Is like, okay, watch TV. It's miserable out here, like do whatever you have to do. We're all just getting by. Um, and when you're in that mode, it's understandable. But one of the things that I think begins to happen is you begin to alienate yourself from your own life. You know,
Hmm.
and you begin to kind of like become a passenger in your life, and you become kind of detached from your real actual lived life, which sets in a deeper problem of this
Right.
kind of nihilism and this kind of, and so I'm not shocked as a society that we're kind of still kind of revolving from that experience. So that was my experience. I gained a lot of weight. I forgot everything that I ever thought was important. Life all kind of just stopped, and I justified it all by like, well, it's a really hard time. Contrasting that with like what he's doing in the middle of World War II is talking about. He's not talking about geopolitics. He's not talking about the science of war and why, you know, well, because we have this twin engine bomber and the Germans don't, we're going to actually end up winning. And yeah,
Yeah.
like he's talking about like your ordinary life, like the whole second half of Mere Christianity is like forgiveness, money, morality. Yeah, it's just, it's like back to, hey, this is your life and it matters. I don't, the fact that we're in a global catastrophe war, um, I want to draw you back to your actual life where you might actually experience happiness, um, if you investigate it and if you make some changes. Do you
Yeah.
say that's accurate? I mean,
Yeah. I mean, I have nothing to add, but it was like investigate happiness. I like that. I think that's what Lewis was doing, is he was saying like, I mean, here's an option. Like, you've tried other things. What if we look at Christianity? So I really, yeah, spot on.
yeah. So it's like it really is for him. It seems to be it's these small things, um, that end up you know end up making a huge impact. Well, great. Well, Sophia, where can people find your work and follow up with more things that you're doing?
Yeah. So, I mean, right now I'm just trying to be consistent on my Substack, which is just my name, Sophia Holcomb at, I think, substack.com. Um, I just try to do weekly articles. Sometimes it's a short story. Sometimes it has nothing to do with Lewis. Um, and just usually history, the classics, liberal arts in general. So that's the main place right now. Yeah, that's pretty
It's
much it.
awesome. Well,
Yeah.
thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.